Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy. We are here today to talk about King Kong. Which one, you might be asking? It's the 2005 one. We are returning to our regular scheduled programming of our Peter Jackson retrospective. I believe the title, and we're sticking with the title, is Peter Jackson Month. This feels like a thing that's probably gone on for about 2, possibly even 3 months now,
Yeah.
technically. But it's been a very weird retrospective in terms of how we've had to schedule this thing. We were going week to week in his earlier films. Lord of the Rings kind of got its own month in December because it was absolutely deserving. We had to devote a month to that. And now we're kind of picking up with his last couple of films. But then his final 3 films, his feature films, we're not going to be covering those until, well, the end of this year now, probably in December when we get to like the 3 Hobbit films. So we've got 2 more to do. We've got King Kong, which is obviously the video you're watching right now. And then, of course, we'll be doing Lovely Bones. And I may as well tease that right now. That'll be coming next Thursday. So that's going to be Thursday, the 13th of January. Lovely Bones. Tate, I think you said you haven't seen that film. So that's going to be a
I have
first
not
time
seen
for you,
Lovely
right?
Bones. No, I have not seen The Lovely Bones, so it'll be very, very interesting when we get round to it.
Absolutely. But today we're here to talk King Kong, and obviously we want to open it up to you guys as well. This is a very long film. The theatrical version is exceptionally long. We are covering the extended version today. It's very minimal stuff that is added, in all honesty, to the
Want to point
extended
out,
version.
I didn't even realize there was an extended version, but I know it's Peter Jackson, so of course there is. But it adds, like, was it 16 minutes more footage? I didn't even notice the 16 minutes more footage. It was a long film when it wasn't an extended edition. It's a long film now.
But we want to hear from you guys. Let us know what you think of King Kong, the 2005 one. Do you like it? Are you kind of in the middle? Do you think it's too long? Maybe you think it could have been longer. Maybe you loved it. Anything in between, do let us know, because we love talking about the Peter Jackson films. We've had a few people watching and commenting as well. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe as always. And if you want to find us on social media, when we do announce what we've got coming, we've got a lot of projects in the works, especially for 2022. I believe we're due for a meeting of some kind, a very formal meeting where we're going to be discussing 2022. We've already got a lot of plans. Follow us on our social media. That's Twitter at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterbox.com/cinemasavvy. King Kong. This is an absolute monolith of a film to talk about, isn't it, Tate? So we don't actually have a plan for this as well, which is very interesting. We have kind of jumped the gun with this, so I'm sure there's a lot to talk about, but we usually kick off with our first time watching the film or memories of the film. Do you remember this film coming out? Did you watch it fairly late in the game? Memories on the film, Tate?
I saw this as soon as it came out on DVD. I don't think I saw it in cinemas. I don't remember seeing it in cinemas, but I do remember seeing it vividly at home and remembering, God, this is a long film. And there are certain things from the film that stick out to you, because this was my first experience with a King Kong film. Since then, like, there have been obviously others that have been since then. I had my eyes open to various other different types of King Kong film. I still haven't seen the original, sadly. Haven't found a copy to watch the original yet. But this was my first experience with Kong as a monster. And
you haven't seen the original? Sorry, was that you haven't seen the original King Kong 1933?
Not seen the original King Kong.
Oh wow, okay, that's fine. That's fine.
I've never got round to it, Chris. I've never taken the time to, sadly. Instead, I took time to watch this 3-hour 20 just monster of a film, as you said. Yeah, my first experience with this, I liked it, but also I could understand its flaws. And that's not very good when you're a lot younger and you can understand the flaws and you can see that it's got like things which aren't that good in it and stuff like that. I remember distinctly, because I'd seen Jurassic Park before this film, I remember distinctly going, oh, this film's meant to be new. Why do the dinosaurs look not as good? And it's kind of stuff like that where it kind of sticks in your mind and stuff like that. I knew that some of the dialogue wasn't the best. When I was younger, I much preferred Jack Black in his role because it's like it's the School of Rock dude. But now, kind of upon rewatch, I can understand that God, he was so miscast as this character. There's a lot of, I think you were talking to me about it during kind of watching the film. There's a lot of miscastings in this kind of film. The only casting you could absolutely say dead on was perfectly right would have been Andy Serkis, and just kind of the mocap stuff that he did, and also just
Lumpy
his
the
character,
chef,
who's actually a fun character during the film. It's a film where I wasn't bored watching it today. I thought the pacing was a bit off. and it's okay, it's watchable, but it's one of those where it's like, yeah, I've watched it. Okay, time to wait like another, 15 years until I watch it again.
It's been a long time since I've watched this, beginning to end. It's been a long time since I've watched this film. Possibly even when it was originally released on DVD, might even be the last time. So yeah, probably not far off.
I think so as well, actually. Years. I genuinely think I haven't seen this since, 2006? This came out in 2005?
It would, yeah, so it would have been 2006 on home video, yeah. I did see this at the cinema. It was the big December film. I think it was released in the UK on the 15th of December. I remember going to see this, though, on Boxing Day, I think, with my next door neighbor. It was the big film. Obviously, I was a massive Lord of the Rings fan at the time, and it was like, oh my God, Peter Jackson's next film's out, and it's another, CGI visual spectacle, and he almost fell into a trend with the Lord of the Rings. You were expecting, I don't know if like early reviews were saying, oh, this film's really long, but you kind of went in, and certainly when you bought your ticket or maybe checked out how long the film was actually on for, you knew that it was 3 hours. So he almost fell into that trend at that point. It was almost like an expectation after Lord of the Rings. Well, of course it has to be 3 hours. It has to be epic in scale and visually dazzling with all these over-the-top action scenes. And I enjoyed it at the time. I thought it was a solid, entertaining blockbuster film. I do love its scope and its scale and, the spectacle that just comes with Peter Jackson naturally. But it wasn't one that really held my attention. The human characters in it and the writing is very lacking.
Why is that always with, like, I feel like the monster films go one of two ways. They either underwrite the human characters but have a lot of them, and also an awful lot of them, or they don't write the human characters at all, and people are like, well, it's lacking some form of humanity to kind of put up against. And there's never I can't think of a single kind of big monster film where it's found the balance. I guess Colossal being the only one that could have find the balance between them. But yeah, ridiculous.
Inherently, it's, there's a lot of minutes to play with in the film, and I do understand that Peter Jackson was he does go out of his way to try and humanize some people, even characters that might only get like one or two scenes, like a shred of character to these characters. But ultimately, King Kong as a plot, as a story, isn't one that's really justified being 3 hours, let alone, I think original cut is 3 hours 8 minutes. I think extended cut's probably closer to maybe like 3 hours 20 or something like that. You don't need that amount of time to tell the story of King Kong. You really don't. And I think originally, when he went to the studio and it was greenlit, I think it was the runtime was kind of set at 2 hours 15 minutes. I think they'd set. And then as Peter Jackson was filming, he notified them that the runtime would be considerably longer, which worried them. And they flew out and saw a rough cut, but they were really impressed with what they saw in the rough cut, that they didn't object to it being longer. But what's very interesting about the extended edition was that I never bought this on DVD when it first came out because, and again, it's that expectation after Lord of the Rings. It would come out on video, it would come out on DVD, theatrical. You'd wait a year, you'd get the extended edition. The same happened with Two Towers, the same happened with Return of the King. And there was always like a niggling doubt in my mind that when this film came out, I thought, would there be an extended cut? So I held out, and I held out for a year. I don't even know if it was a year when this DVD came out. I can't even remember now. I'm guessing it was probably a year. And lo and behold, boom, there we go, extended edition. So I jumped on that when it came out, and there was kind of a lot of nostalgia with King Kong, not just the film. I remember it being a big film. It was in a lot of magazines. I remember the Empire magazines with King Kong holding Anne on the Empire States. That's like a very visually memorable copy of Empire magazine, but also the video game. And it's similar to Return of the King and Two Towers, films that, I obviously love on their own merits, but they also had a great movie tie-in PS2 video game at the time, which, I was that age, I was that video game playing age. And, back then with films coming out, it was always about the movie tie-in game. And most of them were terrible and rushed out and like a shameless cash grab. But a few, like Spider-Man 2, like Return of the King, as I mentioned, and Peter Jackson's King Kong, it's such a long-winded title. I think it's like Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the film, is like the proper name of it on the side of the box. It's obnoxious. It's almost as long as the actual film itself, but it was such a good game, and I think it is regarded, certainly of the time, as one of the best movie tie-in games. So I do have a lot of fond memories of this film that translated into the video game, certainly, as well. So it's going to be a very interesting review to go into, especially I'm very shocked that you haven't seen the original King Kong. I did think, that kind of like,
oh no,
in terms of history, but a bit of behind the scenes and everything, because we talk about Peter Jackson and everything and sort of how it came to be. Out of all of his films, I would say King Kong is probably the most nearest and dearest to his heart, really, as a filmmaker. That it was the film that really started everything for him. The 1933 one was and is his favorite film. Growing up, I think he was 8 years old when he first saw the film. And by the age of 12, because he was clearly like a hands-on filmmaker at the time, he used to make props and models and make little films with like a Super 8 camera. He made a puppet of King Kong out of like coat hangers, like wire, like he had the wire frame. He used his mum's fur coat, hopefully with her permission, to like cut up her fur coat. But he made like a little top of the statue, I was going to say Statue of Liberty, top of the Empire State Building, and a little King Kong model. And he would make stop motion animated films. And he did have the intention of recreating the entire film of King Kong as a 12-year-old with his little Super 8 camera. So he's always had that passion there. But what I wasn't aware of, or not at least into the depth as it was, that this film could have appeared much earlier than it actually did. I don't know if you sort of like read into the behind the scenes, but we could have had this in the late 90s.
Did we cover it when we talked about, was it Heavenly Creatures, or was it when we talked about
could have been Frighteners,
the Frighteners?
Maybe. It could have been,
one of the films they kind of said, oh, he already has the contract. It's just that he's going to be doing other projects first.
Yeah. Yeah, so essentially what it boiled down to was that the studio, Universal, was really impressed with what they saw from the visual effects work in the Frighteners and the dailies and everything, that they actually originally approached him to do a remake of The Creature from the Black Lagoon. I think it was the 50s film, wasn't it? The Creature from the Black Lagoon. And he turned that down, but they became aware of his obsession and his love for the original King Kong, and then they pitched him to do a remake of King Kong. Surprisingly, he originally turned it down, and I don't know why he would have done that. Maybe he felt like it would take away from the original or something like that, but then apparently he became very paranoid that someone else would try and do it. And there is actually a remake of King Kong, 70s film with Jeff Bridges, which I don't want to say it's awful because I've only seen bits of it, but it looks very questionable to say the least. Around this time as well, he was working with Harvey Weinstein. It's a bit awkward to talk about in hindsight. And Miramax Films, and he was waiting, essentially. He was all good to go originally on a film of both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. I think it was going to be like a 2-film kind of deal, or a 3-film, where one was going to cover The Hobbit and there was going to be 2 films dedicated to The Lord of the Rings. But apparently, it was kind of caught in limbo for a while. The rights hadn't been bought from 20th Century Fox, or wherever the rights to The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbits were at the time. So he started working on King Kong. I think Weta and the visual effects team got 6 months into creating things. There was an original, a script that Peter Jackson had worked on, the 90s script, which was apparently going to be set around the discovery of the map on Skull Island. There was going to be, I think Jack Driscoll was going to be like an ex-World War I pilot. Kate Winslet was actually asked to play the role of Anne Darrow, following on, from Heavenly Creatures. She'd worked with him on there. And it was all good to go. It was moving ahead. I think it was given a 1998 slot as to when the film was going to come out. All things were moving ahead. And then Universal pulled the plug really quickly because 1998 also saw the release, or was going to see the release, of the Roland Emmerich Godzilla film. And they thought it might compete with that, or maybe people would think that it's like a crossover thing, which now, of course, we have and is second nature, and we just assume that it is.
That film came out this year as well, or last year. That film came out last year, didn't it? My God, last year was a long year.
Yes, it did. Yeah, it was on HBO Max, wasn't it? It was the beginning of the year, I think. Was it like March? I think it came out in March. I know it's like a whole year's been wiped out. But 1998 also saw the release of another giant gorilla film, which I don't know if you know where I'm going with this. Disney's Mighty Joe Young, which is a film that I love growing up as a kid. But that was also 1998. So there was a lot of competing films. Universal, it's almost unheard of now. Universal just completely pulled the plug. So because of that, he fell back on his laurels and was like, right, well, I'm working on Lord of the Rings. That's on the back burner. I'm going to go and make the 3 greatest films of all time. And he went away and he made the 3 greatest films of all time. So it's very random afterwards. The huge success that the Lord of the Rings was, clearly Universal perked up and thought, oh, we were probably onto a good thing there. They went back to him and said, would you consider coming back for King Kong? And the rest is history. And we have the 2005 King Kong films. That's a bit of the preamble. It is funny to see that he was originally given a budget of 150 mil, which very quickly rose. I think the final figure for the budget was 207 mil.
Wow.
So it was way up there. I'm sure that's for all those Brontosaurus stampede sequences, which I'm sure we'll talk about later.
God, yeah.
Where do we want to start with this? Because we kind of mentioned the human characters, so I don't know if we want to talk about them first before we get into the visuals. Maybe
I want to start with the positives from the film first before we kind of go into the negatives, just to kind of lighten what we've got coming up ahead. So as far as I'm aware, like this film won Oscars, didn't it? It won
3 Oscars, yeah.
For best sound mixing, sound editing, and visual effects. That's fair. I can understand it winning. I can understand it winning for all 3 of those categories. There were some questionable visual effects in there, very questionable.
Yeah.
One scene in particular, which we have mentioned a few times now already. I'm sure that's going to be our favorite scene when we get down to it. Other things that I enjoyed, I quite like some of the characters, and the way they're portrayed. I think Adrian Brody works in this film. I think he does a decent enough job in his role. As far as the kind of main human characters from the main group of like our heroes, he's the one who kind of sticks out to me the most as having kind of a character. The only other person in there who you could say also has a character is Jamie Bell's character, which I've forgotten the name of.
James. What's the kid called? He's with Mr. Hayes.
Yeah.
Jimmy. It's Jimmy.
Jimmy. Yeah. Those are the only 2 characters that I could kind of think of that have a bit to them and stuff like that, and are cast well, I guess. The rest of the crew is really expendable, which is quite interesting. I feel like if they'd cut down the amount of people who were on the boat in the first place, because it seems like more and more people keep on coming out of nowhere, especially when it was a kind of not even a ragtag crew at the start of the film. They basically say, okay, we all need to get on ship now. We're still waiting on people to get on ship. And it's just like, well, you've got like 50 people on ship who have died on screen. It's like, how many more people do you have down there on this tiny little boat? But yeah, no, visual effects are absolutely fantastic, especially in the scene as depicted above. That is quite an impressive scene in itself. Even kind of towards the ending where he goes to New York, there are some quite impressive kind of scenes with the CGI, and the mocap done by Andy Serkis is fantastic as always. It was quite interesting because I was looking out for kind of his face blended into kind of
You
Kong,
can see it a bit. You can see it a bit in some moments.
A little bit. It's not as much as the new person who's playing Kong, where you can really see it. You're like, wow, it's that guy. I can't remember what his name is, but he was in Black Mirror. And it's like, wow, you can really see that is an actor underneath there. With this, there's kind of enough blend. And we talked about this beforehand, because you said you weren't sure how you felt on the design of Kong, with it being kind of very, very gorilla-ish with the silverback and everything like that. I'm okay with that. He's meant to be, was it King of the Apes, or he's meant to be a beast and stuff like that. He kind of shows, it's very, very kind of visually kind of showing that he is the King of the Apes, having that silverback, which is a nice kind of touch added to it. And even though he does look more gorilla-like than kind of all of the other adaptations that we've seen before, it kind of works because it makes him more animal and less kind of human, and makes him more kind of towards that beast kind of narrative and stuff like that, which is what they push for quite heavily in this film. So I'm okay with the design.
Yeah, and I think, with the with the use of motion capture as well, getting all of those very fine details in the emotion. I know that Andy Serkis watched gorillas in London Zoo. I think he went to Rwanda as well and actually saw them in the wild. He poured over hours and hours and hours, and the animators did as well, in order to get it, as close to a real life gorilla as possible. And I think making it more like an animal does add to those, the somber scenes, the sad scenes, the emotional scenes in the film. And when the film goes those places, it definitely does tug at the heartstrings. It's down to the music as well, which we'll talk about later. And it's wonderful. That was me just like nitpicking completely. I think it works for the film, but King Kong, to my understanding at least, if you ask anyone on the street, like, what animal is King Kong? Everyone, myself included, would say a gorilla. I get it. But when you see him on any film, even the newer ones, he's more of an ape-like creature. He's more often than not bipedal. He doesn't always walk on the knuckles like a proper silverback gorilla. He very rarely has. I don't think he ever has had the silverback before, which he does in this one. They literally just took like a gorilla, gave him more of a kind of brutish face. I think they mentioned that they were kind of going for a Robert De Niro in Raging Bull kind of look, almost like a boxer, like a bit punch drunk, like he's seen lots of battles. And even if you look at the original trailer for this film, to the final one that we get, as is often the case with a lot of Peter Jackson films, the visual effects change considerably, and the design for King Kong was chief among them. It's totally different. I think there's probably a side-by-side comparison you can see. There's even scenes that you see in the original trailer which don't make it into the film, again, as is often the case with a lot of films now, which I would assume is what King Kong's sort of introduction to his character would have been like. It was very close to the 1933 film. It's where they first wash up on the beach and Carl Denham's rolling the camera. He's shooting a scene with Ann Darrow, and he says, like, "You're looking fearful. Now scream, Ann, scream for your life." And she lets out that, that Hollywood scream. And then they hear Kong's roar from across the island. And that's kind of like your first, clue as to King, there's something on the island. It's King Kong, and that doesn't come until much later in the film when, they do the whole sacrifice thing. But yeah, the design, I guess I'm just, even in the original 33 one, he's kind of bipedal. He's just like an ape-like creature. And the newer one is very similar to that. I actually love the new design for Kong in the recent films that we've had. It's just artistic interpretation, isn't it? They chose to go with a more sort of real look, and mannerism to the character as well, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like the design.
And the visual effects still hold up. I do want to say that, like, they're fantastic.
Some parts do, some parts don't. Like King Kong himself absolutely holds up.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I will say, this fight is kind of some of the
that's
best.
Where all the money went, Tate. All the money went on King Kong.
All the money went. And they were like,
it didn't go on the Brontosauruses. That was the last thing.
They need to be chased by something through this small alleyway. I wonder what we can put in there.
Yeah.
Should we talk about it? I feel like we have to talk about it.
No, I want to go into more positives first. I'm not ready to...
The music. The music was fantastic. The score is really, really good. And I was actually going to go back to and listen to the score kind of afterwards, because it was one that I was like, wow, this is really kind of grand. It captures kind of... From the things that I've seen from the original King Kong, it captures that kind of essence. It captures the era perfectly as well, which is something that's very difficult to do when you've got like a big monster movie and it's set in a period piece. It's very, very kind of difficult to do that. And they absolutely captured what the kind of sounds you would listen to with the grand kind of scale, as if you're watching a theatre production of what is happening. It's really, really good.
Yeah, it does have that kind of, I won't say kaiju, because, Kong isn't a kaiju, but that bum, 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 that kind of lumbering monster music that you expect from a King Kong type film. But when those emotional beats hit again, James Newton Howard is fantastic at the emotional score. You look at Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, when he was collaborating with Hans Zimmer. Hans Zimmer would do a lot of the action and the intense scenes, and then James Newton Howard would do a lot of the emotional ones. That's kind of where his strengths lie as a composer, I would say. And it is a fantastic score. Now, there's a very interesting backstory to this score. Peter Jackson, coming on board for this, you look at the cast and the crew and the people behind the scenes. He used a lot of the same team predominantly that he did on The Lord of the Rings. The same cinematographer returning, Andrew Lesnie, once again using the same editor as he has from back in the day, Jamie Selkirk. Screenplay, Fran Walsh, Philippa Boynes, all the usual suspects. I think he even used Alan Lee, the conceptual designer that he used on Lord of the Rings for King Kong as well. And some of the conceptual designs are fantastic, like the village of the tribes people and the ruins and everything. It looks amazing. And he did use Howard Shore to do the music. Howard Shore did the music. And then 7 weeks before the release of the film, Peter Jackson got rid of Howard Shore. I don't know the reasons why. I've looked everywhere for the reasons why. I've heard creative differences. And James Newton Howard produced the score for this film in 7 weeks, which is tremendous. Now, if you do listen to the film, there are a number of moments where cues are repeated quite a lot. And watching it tonight, I did become aware of that. It fits the film, but you can tell that it was probably, if he'd have had more time, if he'd have had all of the time, you would have probably have had more of a varied score. But there are a lot of action beats in this film. Even the action beats kind of get repetitive after a while, and so too does the music. Howard Shore does get a cameo in the film, though, when Carl Weathers, when Carl Denham is showcasing King Kong to the crowd when he takes him back to New York, and you have that orchestra that conducts and chimes up. That's Howard Shore conducting.
Oh, that's cool.
So that was a cool cameo.
Doesn't he get crushed?
Probably. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But and another positive that I have about this film is that just the links and the references, but also the subversion to a lot of the original 1933 film. There are so many in there, and it does feel like a love letter to that film. Sticking with that scene with the composer, the music that plays as Carl Denham's showing King Kong to everyone is the original score to the 1933 film. The sort of gaudy dance that the show people, like the tribesmen doing when they're recreating what happened and everything, and they're in the really over the top costumes and gorilla costumes. That is what the tribe is like in the 1933 film. It was a different time where you could get white actors in blackface and dress them as gorillas and just dancing around. It was a different time in 1933.
I know.
And what I love the setting of this film as well, setting it in 1933. And I think that's a beautiful homage as well, because obviously when the original King Kong film was made in 1933, that wasn't a period piece film. That was a present day film. That was of the time. So I think it's such an aesthetic, watching older films like that. So for Peter Jackson to choose to set it in that year, it's quite a nice backdrop as well. You've got the Depression in New York as the backdrop when we get, like an introduction into the film. It just keeps it grounded. I like the setting, and the way that New York looks as well.
Yeah, the opening sequence for that kind of where they show freak show and then it's entertainment and then it's freak show and then it's entertainment. I like how that's framed at the very start of the film, and it's kind of set against the backdrop of kind of like the late kind of Depression and stuff like that. And it's just a fun piece to go back to. I wish more films did that, that take kind of material from kind of ages ago. Wouldn't you love to see, like, I know that people don't want a remake of the Mummy films, but wouldn't you love to see a remake of the Mummy films set in the 90s and the early 2000s?
Oh, that'd be interesting. Yeah, that'd be interesting. That's the next
instead of going in with the Tom Cruise modernization one. It'd be so much more fun to just kind of go back to that time of that period piece and just kind of have it as a kind of actual remake of the thing at the time. But no, this film does a lot of things right, and it is watchable and it is entertaining, but there's so many flaws that I've kind of seen with it just on rewatch and stuff like that. I think I'm going to talk about it now. It's the Brontosaurus chase. It's so stupid and ridiculous, and they could have put literally any animal or anything chasing them in there. They could have just had the raptors, to be honest, chasing them. They didn't need the Brontosauruses in there as well, causing a stampede. It's a CGI mess. Like, the fact that Adrian Brody literally body checks one of the raptors into a Brontosaurus at one stage. At one stage, the dude who's the coward actor, like, he's hiding underneath a rock, and then suddenly there's, like, a raptor above him and stuff like that. And then the chase ends with what I genuinely wrote it to you in a message. I've got past the dinosaur car crash, whatever I wrote. It's literally like about 20 to 30 seconds post kind of everyone stopping of just CGI dinosaurs slapping into each other because they're all stopping at the same time. It's stupid.
They look
It's
terrible.
so
As
stupid.
they don't. I know they have textures on them, but they just look really smooth and kind of slippery. Like that. Like they haven't put all the textures on them. They look like really.
It looks like that sequence was designed to be a video game level. That's like what was the film that we watched? Was it King Arthur: Legend of the Sword, where it had like that video game ending? And you're like, well, that's been designed because they might do a video game adaptation. It's very clear that's why they've done it.
Yeah, it's usually reviled as one of the worst CGI in films. This scene, the Brontosaurus, and this is the.
Here's my question: that or Shia LaBeouf swinging through the trees in.
I'd probably say this is worse just because it goes on for way longer. I think this is an infinitely more watchable scene than the Shia LaBeouf scene, and the kind of travesty that scene does to the Indiana Jones legacy.
It's in the same bracket, though, isn't it?
It's in the same bracket, and watching it against the thing is, it didn't look good at the time, and it sure as shit doesn't look good now. Especially watching it tonight, you can see like the jagged, faded lines of the actors in the rotoscope. The thing that doesn't sell it at all, not just the fact that they're in the most ridiculous circumstance ever, and most of them make it out of it.
Yeah.
There are things that, and I think actually Spielberg does this, but I mean, this film does it way worse, is where Carl's running with the camera and he falls over and the dinos are like right on top of him. And then it cuts to Adrian Brody and he runs back. And then the dinos have like retreated back like so many meters and they're almost close. They're almost on top of them. And then they're arguing over the camera, cuts back to the dinos and they're way back here. And it's like they would have been trampled 100 times over in this time. And it's so noticeable.
In fact, genuinely, the best thing they could have done was just stand still and just kind of like the raptors were after the giant dinosaurs. And this is the one thing about this film. I know that kind of they do this with like it's kind of a flaw to the whole dinosaur kind of in film thing. The smaller dinosaurs, yes, they will go after humans because they're about the same size. They look like a meal, but also they're very bony, so they'd probably rather go for the bigger dinosaurs. That's a bigger meal. The bigger dinosaurs, especially in this film, if they see something as small as a human, they're not going to fucking charge at it. They're just going to they're not a big threat. And it's something that is seen in like the fish scene as well, which is afterwards.
Yeah, like, that's in the extended cut. That's an extended scene that was added back in.
Yeah,
that one.
It was not needed. The only thing you could have added was, in fact, the only thing that was actually good from adding to that scene was Jack Black's character filming the guy dying at the end, because it showed kind of how deep he was down the rabbit hole already.
But everything you do get that many other times, though, I feel.
Yeah, like but he gives a look in that scene, which I actually really, really like as one of my favorite kind of moments, because in the other scenes where he's filming other people dying, he's kind of like got that kind of sorrowful, no, and he does have that thing. But after this scene, he goes in with like the speech of like selling to the masses and stuff like that. And it's like, Jesus, he really has turned.
Well, he repeats it twice. He's almost like a sociopath. Like when they first go to the island and then the natives turn on him and kill the sound guy. He comes back, he's drinking whiskey and he's really shook up about it. And he's like, well, he didn't die for nothing. We're going to finish this. He genuinely sounds sincere, like, and we'll donate the proceeds to his wife and kids. And then when Herb dies, who's like the guy who's carrying around the film reels and like the lenses, I think it is, isn't it? Or the tripod or whatever it is. When he dies again, he says, we're going to finish it and donate the proceeds to his wife and kids. So I think you already see that kind of side to him.
He also goes in with the whole thing of like, we could capture him and sell him for a ticket, kind of that speech.
Yeah,
I think is the best acting that Jack Black does in the film. But also this one look at the end of the fish scene of like him just kind of still going, and he's just like his eyes are wide open, and he just looks possessed. That's kind of the only positives I could give for his character. I genuinely wouldn't know who you could cast in his place, but I assume because this is just an assumption, it may be completely wrong. Jack Black does somewhat resemble Peter Jackson. He's a bearded guy. He's quite large in stature and stuff like that. I'm wondering if Peter Jackson went, look, I made King Kong when I was a kid. I want this character to kind of resemble me. and resemble that kind of part of me that wanted to film King Kong and wanted to kind of recreate it. I'm wondering if that kind of carried across, because otherwise you would definitely cast someone completely different for this role.
Well, a lot of the time when they have, I think from what I've read about Jack Black, the reason they cast him is that he was remarkably like Orson Welles in terms of his portrayal of the character, which I mean, I don't know, like that kind of brash, kind of arrogant, constantly talking motor mouth kind of, especially like Orson Welles, maybe like back in the day in his younger days, perhaps with like the bravado. But I love Jack Black. He is an absolute icon. I love Jack Black. He's just so endearing. He's great. I love him. But when I look at him, I never see a character. I always see Jack Black. It's the voice. Even in Kung Fu Panda, I don't see the character of Po. I hear Jack Black, and as you mentioned, like, School of Rock and all the other films he's done, and even in Brutal Legend, the video game, it's Jack Black.
High Fidelity. Literally, name any Jack Black film, and it's Jack Black. It's not.
So for me, one of the biggest problems with this film is the casting, and chief among them is Carl Denham. I just can't take him seriously. I can't. It like the dramatic scenes. It feels like Jack Black's doing some kind of shtick, and I can't, when he's trying to be sincere, I'm not getting that sincerity across. And you mentioned Adrian Brody as well. Phenomenal actor, great actor, brilliant. Yeah. But it's the writing for me that really does it, and I am seeing those telltale signs here, when we eventually talk about the Hobbit films next year, probably. Where it's not Peter Jackson's finest hour, and the writing isn't great, and you've got those that love triangle with Killy and Toriel, and the really like ham-fisted, over-the-top romantic dialogue that just doesn't feel natural. I'm getting elements of that in this film when they meet each other in the corridor, and it's almost like they're star-crossed lovers right from the off, and he's like, sea legs, not that you don't have good legs, and it's like this really awkward dialogue. I don't buy the romance in this film at all, and I don't want to blame the actors involved. I think both of them are fantastic actors, and can make romantic scenes work, but the writing just isn't there. And maybe that's the point, because you are in a weird way meant to feel more for Anne and Kong's connection as a sort of almost love story between those two, Beauty and the Beast kind of style thing. And in that case, the character of Jack Driscoll does have to be almost like the third wheel, the one who's there. But I guess you could say it's an interesting subversion as well, because I always forget the name of it. Bruce Baxter, Carl Chandler is the name of the actor, Bruce Baxter, who's this really, and this is what I mean, like the writing is so on the nose. You've got like the movie execs at the beginning that are almost like caricatures. It's like, hey, they're going to be boobies in this movie? Jigglies, jablomas, bazoomas. It's so over the top and ridiculous. They're always concerned about money. And Carl Chandler's character, as well as Bruce Baxter, is so over the top. And, some people might like that about the film, and those are the aspects about the characters that make them memorable. And this is a cool subversion to the 1933 film, perhaps. But Jack Driscoll acts exactly like how Bruce's character does in this film. In the original 1933 one, he is like that classic manly, now listen here, you dizzy dame kind of character. And the dialogue that he in the film that they're filming on the boat, where she goes like, oh, this is so exciting, I've never been on a ship before, and he's like, I've never been on one with a woman before. That is verbatim the dialogue from the original 1933 King Kong film. So they worked that into sort of like this fictitious film that they're shooting on the boat. So I thought that was cool. It is a play on the character and the archetype from that original film to this one, but the writing's just, it's either so surface level that I don't care, or it's so cartoonish, and then you got like Jimmy and what is it, Mr. Hayes. I don't give a fuck about their relationship and their connection at all.
I mean, it's more character development than
it is something
any other character. Very interestingly, Carl Chandler, I completely forgot and didn't even notice. He was in the Godzilla versus Kong film. I believe he was also,
he's been
he was in the Godzilla films. So he's he managed to cross over, and
he's like the J. Jonah Jameson of the Kong franchise. It's so fun.
Oh my god, yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a lot of the even character. I was mentioning as I was watching the film, I was sending you bits going like, why is this scene in the film? Even at the beginning, it goes into like the whole vaudeville thing with Anne Darrow and gives her a backstory. And there's this like whole emotional farewell to like this old guy saying he's moving back to Chicago. We've had one scene of him. Like, why are we concerning ourselves with this old guy that she's done vaudeville with? Like, let's keep the focus on the film. And going back to some of the CGI and some of the action beats in the film, that Brontosaurus scene is awful. It's like Peter Jackson is clearly having so much fun with this film, and I'm endeared to that. I know that this is an absolute passion project for him. I know that it's a film that's very near and dear to his heart. He's always wanted to make King Kong, and now in 2005, he's got Weta Digital at his disposal. He's got this infinite amount of money. It's like a kid in the sandbox. It's like the sky's the limit. The possibilities are endless, and therein lies the problem. Just because you can make a Brontosaurus stampede sequence doesn't mean you should make a Brontosaurus stampede sequence. And the storytelling of this film is quite frustrating, but I can't be too hard on it because I know that fundamentally is what the original King Kong film is like.
Yeah.
The film's very stop and start, and certainly when you get to the second act, it's literally encounter after encounter of monster, escape, fight.
Yeah.
And the story doesn't really develop. It doesn't really move on. Like the characters don't really learn or progress or do anything different. You could compare that in structure to his latest Hobbit films, for example, where the Hobbit fundamentally is like a series of episodic things. But as opposed to the Hobbit, where, the character, going back to the book, the character of Bilbo is finding an item. He's learning something about himself. He's developing his courage. He's getting them out of situations. He's proving himself. No one's really proving anything in this. It's literally
just dying.
It's just, we've got a extended sequence again. The Triceratops fight. The first encounter they have is in the extended edition. You have that. You have the stampede sequence. You have the river sequence. The bug sequence. The log. And then coupled with the stuff going on with Anne as well, with the V-Rex fight and, all of that stuff. There's so much in this film.
All of the sequences, I know that there are those of dangerous things on the island and stuff like that, and you got to get that across and everything like that. But at the same time, like, you're not there to see the animals like the humans are fighting. You're there to see the title of the film, King. You're there to see Kong. That's kind of the main drawing and stuff like that. And as much as those sequences go and stuff like that, and a lot of them were not that good, like the first Triceratops sequence, the fish sequence, like all these sequences together kind of weren't the best. There was one sequence which stood out for me out of all of those, which actually did work. And if I was to edit the film, that would be one that I would definitely keep in. And that was the insect sequence. Because for some strange reason, and I don't know whether you got the same vibes, but it's the only scene that felt like it could have fit into Lord of the Rings, or it's the only scene that felt very Lord of the Rings styled. They were stuck in a dark cabin.
It's like Shelob, isn't it? It's like the giant spider in Return of the King, very isolated. The music kind of cuts out. It's very eerie and horror. It is like a horror film, essentially.
It was really cool that the music, it cut out, but it was also really kind of that low kind of humming, like that kind of hymn style humming and stuff like that. It was the first time that I genuinely thought that the main characters were in danger. I'll put it that way. And I was like, throughout all the other sequences, I was like, oh yeah, the main characters will get out of here and stuff like that. And like, I could kind of remember which characters survived and stuff like that based off kind of the scenes and stuff like that. But in this sequence, it was like, oh my God, like, I genuinely don't know who makes it out of here alive. Like Lumpy dies and stuff like that, getting killed by the giant.
That's brutal. That's disgusting as well, isn't it?
I think that scene actually shows proper horror because only 3 of them get out of there, really. Like, that's really, really cool and really well done. And I think that scene kind of... Is it my favorite scene? Possibly. I mean, it's one scene that definitely stands out to me as a scene that, like, if the rest of the film was like that, like, they properly had their backs against the walls and they were being attacked by the smaller things and Kong was dealing with the bigger things, and that would have been a much better film. More streamlined as well.
Yeah, and there's other bit. I think everyone, anyone who saw the film back in the day, or as as a teenager or whatever, they always remember those horrible, disgusting worms that come out and start snacking on Andy Serkis. That's like burned into your mind. There's even other like quick little bits as well, where you see someone trying to like scale the wall, and then boom, this like giant crab claw comes in and like snatches him. It's and that stuff's great. And there's a cool story behind the bug pit scene as well, in that it's almost like a lost hidden gem of the original King Kong film in 1933. So apparently the directors shot an insect pit sequence. So when they fall from the log and into the pit, there were going to be these giant spiders that came out and, ate some of the crew essentially. And the footage was lost. I don't know if the footage got caught in a fire, or it got misplaced, or it was lost, or it was just straight up deleted. The only evidence that it exists is a still image frame that was in a film magazine back in the day, or like an older film magazine, that shows that it was a thing and it was originally filmed. So Peter Jackson decided to put it in his film, which is great. But what's fantastic as well, on one of the behind the scenes, Peter Jackson also made a scene in black and white, in like the original parameters of the original King Kong film, with stop motion animation. You could take that scene that Peter Jackson has produced on the bonus features of this and splice it directly into that 1933 one.
Nice.
It's such a wonderful love letter to that. It's a really good sequence as well, how he's done it. The proper sort of like janky stop motion animation and, little dummy puppets and everything of like action figures. It's fantastic. You can find it on YouTube. It's such a love letter to it. So
and I love the fact that he has so much passion for this film. It's just such a shame that
he lacks restraint. He lacks restraint.
More time. I feel like with more time, he would have like made the film even longer, and maybe even made it into 2 parts or something like that. But I feel like given more time and more kind of restraint, and maybe even more script writing time and just streamlining of the film, if he had to stick to that original budget, I feel like this film would have been more watchable. But maybe we wouldn't have got as good a CGI on Circus. Who knows?
It's frustrating because, as I mentioned, we've seen the majority of Peter Jackson's films now, and one thing I think you can say is a common occurrence throughout most of his films is excess and over the top, especially going back to like his earlier horror films and everything. He lives for the spectacle and being over the top and these really elaborate action set pieces and funny sort of comedic beats throughout his action things. And, it's great to see that passion and it's wonderful. But from this film, certainly, this is where I started to see Peter Jackson lacking restraint. Peter, the Lord of the Rings had wonderful action scenes, which do go over the top in some scenes, Legolas surfing down the stairs on a shield, climbing up an Oliphant, all these big elaborate sequences. But that felt right to those films. When you get to this film, this is where I started to see that bloat to the films, that overindulgence, and the really what's the word? The inconsistent CGI. For every King Kong motion capture, which is wonderful, you'll have a Brontosaurus sequence, and that goes for like it was reminding me of the Hobbit films as well, where there's wonderful CGI in the Hobbit. Again on Gollum, the motion capture there looks fantastic. Smaug looks wonderful as well. But then you have the barrel sequence, with some really bad rotoscoping and it's often the lighting doesn't match. And that's one of the things in the Brontosaurus Stampede of this film. You've got these people running on a green screen in place almost. And the lighting just doesn't, they're like really bright and like the lights are focused on them as they're under the legs so they'd be in shade and it doesn't blend and you can tell you're not looking at something real. So there's no stakes to it. There's no tension because these characters are in the most like wildly elaborate sequence. And that's the problem with this film. I think if you cut this film down to maybe even the original runtime, whatever it was going to be, 2 hours 15, 2 hours. The original runtime of the 1933 film is 2 hours or 2 hours 5 minutes. I think you first see Kong in that original film at around the 80-minute mark. Yeah. If they could have matched that a little bit more, or just Peter Jackson could have shown some restraint.
We see Kong at like the 65th minute mark in this film, but
I think it's longer than that. It has to be longer than that.
I swear they're on the island on the 65th minute.
I don't. When I was watching this and it said end of disc 1, The adventure continues on disc 2. I thought, you fucked up. You've done something wrong there. King Kong should not be a film, a plot that needs to be spread onto 2 discs. It shouldn't.
I
That's
can't
just
believe that
madness.
things are still spread. I get the Lord of the Rings being spread onto 2 discs, but this film definitely doesn't deserve to be spread onto 2 discs and stuff like that. But
I'm trying to think of some other films. You know, we'll kind of move into like the second portion of the film now as well, with like the New York stuff. Some of the stuff that I do really dislike, and I know what they were trying to do. I hate this when Anne's trying like doing vaudeville in front of King Kong for his amusement, and he's laughing and she's juggling. I'm like, why is this in a King Kong film? Now, on the flip side of that, and I sent you the scenes as well, and I think the music definitely helps us as well. The beautiful scene, as I call it, where it's Kong looking at the sunset and that music's playing the emotional beat, and she's like, beautiful, which is bookended fantastically when they're on the Empire State Building. That's the stuff that I really appreciate about this film. And it does tug at the heartstrings. And, you know, Peter Jackson does get you to those places. It feels genuinely sad. I remember people crying in the cinema when Kong died at the end of this thing.
I do want to just add to that. There are scenes that try to do that but don't work. And one of them was one you sent me, and it was Kong on Ice. Kong on Ice is stupid. Kong on Ice should not be a thing. I think that's just a fluff piece added to the film. That is an extended scene. I'm sorry, but Kong's just escaped.
It's the original.
I know. But I feel like if there was one thing you could trim from it, cut that.
I think there's other things that I would rather cut. I'd start hacking away at some of the action scenes before I get rid of that scene. It's a scene that often divides a lot of people, and I can understand both sides to it. I think a lot of it, why it kind of sells it on me, is that it is a moment where the film is just taking a breather. I think more so than the ice dance sequence, I prefer the bit where he's caused some havoc in New York and all the cops and all the police are after him and, the army and everything. But then he sees Anne at the end of the street. Beautiful shot. The street of New York, she's walking towards him, almost like a glow around her.
You can kind of expect Take My Breath Away to be playing.
Yeah.
Towards the street.
And like the sound, the ambience of the city just kind of fades into the background and everything's still and calm and silent. I love that scene. And then it leads straight away into the ice dance sequence. The music really sells it for me. In fact, I think it's called Ice Dance, is my favorite piece of music from the whole film. Tear-jerking, tear-inducing. It's absolutely wonderful. One of James Newton Howard's best as far as I'm concerned. And it is a nice scene. And it is that kind of connection between the two. But when you break,
there's a connection. You already know there's a connection.
But when you break the physics down, and this is where people come down on it, how strong is that ice? They're in Central Park at that moment, right?
I do want to point out that it gets taken out by, what was it, a bullet or like a bomb?
Yeah, it's like a shell, isn't it? It's like a mortar shell that goes off. But King Kong is like doing full-on jumping, bounding belly slides on it. God knows how much a 25-foot gorilla weighs. He's got to weigh a good few ton easily. And he's like bounding up on this ice and it's not cracking, it's not splitting. That's some strong ice. That is some goddamn... So when I look at that, that's where I'm like, the physics of it don't work out. It's always with ice that Peter Jackson can't seem to get the hang of in physics. No. Like the final battle between Thorin and Azog in Battle of the Five Armies, where they're on ice, so much ridiculous stuff happens on that would just be physically impossible when it comes to ice. Another thing that I remembered from not too fondly from the Hobbit films watching this, actually. How well do you remember Battle of the Five Armies, Tate?
I watched it once and tried to blank it from my memory entirely.
Do you remember the scene towards the end where Legolas rides a giant CGI bat to the top of a tower?
No.
He grabs hold
he does
of
that. That sounds ridiculous.
He grabs hold of one wing.
I know exactly what scene you're going to be talking about.
Flies him up. When they make their escape from this, I was like, oh, so that's where Peter Jackson got the idea for the Hobbit Battle of the Five Armies. He was like, how do I get this character from A to B quickly? CGI bat.
Send the eagles.
So I'm trying to think of something. We've talked about the music. We've talked about the CGI, which is great.
I think I'm ready to go into kind of like my.
Do you have any favorites? I was going to say favorite scenes.
My favorite scene is probably the bug scene, just because of how brutal it is and how the music plays and stuff like that. Even the over the top ridiculous rescue, I quite like as well. I think it's a nice kind of character beat, and it's like a bit of kind of humor coming back in, and the ridiculous Tarzan swinging through the gorge with the shooting. It's exactly what you would expect his film character to do. So I quite like that scene. Other than that, I I will always like the kind of the plane scene and stuff like that. I find it hilarious that Peter Jackson is the one who actually kills Kong in the end, as he is one of the people in the planes
Yeah.
as his cameo. Least favorite scene, gotta be that Brontosaurus chase, right?
Yeah.
It's one of those scenes where I was genuinely tempted to skip. It was like, I know what's coming, I know what's going to happen, I know who's probably going to die. It'll be characters that you don't get any screen time at all. Maybe one who gets some screen time. Fine, just skip through it.
Yeah. I think favorite scene for me would be either of the beautiful scenes, either the one on the island or the one where they're on the Empire States, and that haunting shot as well, where it's the wide shot. I think that was the shot actually that was on the Empire magazine front cover, and then brrr, the planes like bank around the corner, and you're like, oh, here we go. And I think actually that adds to the impact of the film, knowing where the story's going, know what happens at the end of King Kong. It definitely, you know where it's going. I think that adds to the emotion of the film, certainly. So I love that scene. I'm trying to think of some other ones. There's so many action beats in this film; they all kind of blur into one for me.
I guess the dinosaur fight's also a good scene as well.
I think it's too overblown, though. You know, like the original film, 1933.
Yeah,
it's one Kong versus one T-Rex.
I
That's it.
like the moment where she picks her side. That's the moment which I quite
That's
like,
the
where
bit
she
from the
starts
yeah.
backing slowly towards Kong, whereas she was afraid before, and now she's like, actually, do you know what? I'd rather go with the gorilla who's trying not to kill me than the dinosaur who is trying to kill me.
Yeah.
So.
And you know, like the final few moves of the fight, where you know he climbs on his back and he punches him, and he's like kind of riding cowboy kind of thing, and he breaks the jaw. That is verbatim, movement for movement, how, you know, what happens in the 1933 one. So again, Peter Jackson probably trying to recreate that scene as a kid, finally gets to do it and pays homage to that in a wonderful way. But it is just that, rein it back in. Like, does the fact that King Kong is fighting not one T-Rex, sorry, V-Rex as they're called in this, not one V-Rex, but three. And, you know, and he can't just, he's fighting them in a fist fight, like a 3-on-1, and then they've got to fall off a cliff, and then they're going to be snagged in vines, and they're going to be swinging, and he's got to try and get to her, and she falls on the top of the snout of what it's like. You don't need all of this. I think you could have had a very impactful fight that was, you know, a fraction of the length of this fight and didn't need all of this you know, all of this extraneous stuff. It's like I finally have the chance to go bigger beyond belief, and it's like the George Lucas effect sometimes. It's like the James Cameron effect now, who's, you know, kind of fallen back on CGI storytelling. It's just like, you don't need it all.
Very quickly, as my last point, my question is, because I don't know if I just remembered this differently or not, but the scene where Kong finally gets captured with the chloroform, I distinctly remember watching this as a kid, being the only time that I have seen this film, there being more chloroform being thrown at Kong and hitting Kong.
I think it's the same amount. It's the same amount.
For me, I don't know. No, it was in like from me rewatching it.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Like, yeah, I distinctly remember there being more chloroform being used to kind of subdue him. I don't know why I remember there being more chloroform being used to subdue him. Whether that's like, I don't know if people are going to tell me online, oh, they also remembered it, or whether they didn't, whether it's like a Mandela effect kind of thing. But like, it seemed like he went down after, like, what was it? A bit of chloroform in the water and then one chloroform to the face. I remember him being just peppered with chloroform as a kid, and I don't know why I remember that.
Well, he gets some when he breaks through the gate, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He gets quite a bit there, and then he pulls himself out of like the harpoons, and then I don't know. I know he gets one to the face. I think they throw a couple more bottles at him, don't they? Towards the end.
No, it's just one to the face. It's literally just one to the face at the end.
Oh, I thought he got a few towards the end. I'm not sure. He gets I mean, the harpoon to the leg kind of slows him down a lot as well, certainly. And then I think that's when they go.
Yeah, but it's just I just remember like Jack Black's character just throwing more at him when he's really close up, like getting
just
him
like a machine gun of chloroform.
No. I don't know why, but the way I remember it is he would get it up, he'd throw it in, he would hit him in the face, he'd go, "Whoa, what was that?" and stuff like that. And then Jack Black would already be picking one up again. And as he turns to face him again, then he'd get him again and kind of You could see his eyes slowly going down, and Jack Black doesn't. I don't know why I'm remembering it this way, but Jack Black doesn't give up. He doesn't like go, oh, he's falling asleep now. He just keeps throwing because he's so obsessed with it. I don't know whether that's.
But that scene in particular, I sent you a voice message about it, and I remember thinking at the time, we've had this. Everyone talks about the boat sequence as well. It's just never ending. Characters we don't care about. They're trying to give a shred of character to these characters that aren't meant to really have characterization because they're there just kind of lined up for the meat grinder when they get to Skull Island. When it's like Kong, the eighth wonder of the world. The one thing that I always wanted to know was how did they get Kong's body from the shore back to the ship? And we never get the answer. Like going into this, I thought we're finally going to get our answer. Peter Jackson is going to plug every hole in this film. We're going to see the whole boat. There's going to be like another hour of a boat journey back to New York, and we're going to see every single second of it.
Whether
and
he fades to black and behind it, or whether he's actually on the ship, like he can't.
I imagine he'd have to be on the ship, but like it fades to black, fades back in, and boom, we're in New York. And I was like, oh, so you do have the power of editing and economic storytelling then, Peter Jackson. Then why haven't you used this a million other times before it?
Can't wait for the extended edition, Chris, where it explains it all.
Actually, there's speaking of the chloroform, when Choi, and actually that's another big thing as well, Choi in this film. I really like the friendship between Choi and Lumpy. That's one of my favorite things, how he's kind of always got his back. In the original 1933 one, you can imagine what the character of Choi is like, right? And he is that stereotype back in the 30s. So they used the character, but they actually made him a character this time. When they're in the cages, and that he says like, "Oh, we've I forgot the name of the captain. Oh God." It's like a German. Is it like a German name? I think, or something, isn't it?
Yeah, the actor's German.
Engelhorn, I think the name is of the captain. He's like a poacher. He's like, he will do you a great price on White Rhino. There's a box in the background. I think it's behind the Jack Driscoll, which says, oh God, what is it? Sumatran rat monkey, beware the bite. That's a great reference. That's such a good reference. I love stuff like that.
And now I get the reference.
Yes, exactly. And they go to Skull Island to get the rat monkey. So clearly, oh God. Okay, if I'm going to do like final thoughts on this. Oh, one thing I did want to say as well in terms of references, and I don't know how I would have felt about this one. So Fay Wray, who played the original Anne in the 1933 film, Peter Jackson reached out to her to deliver the final line of the movie. It wasn't the airplanes, it was Beauty that killed the Beast. And he wanted the original Anne Darrow to deliver that line. And she was kind of immediately resistant to the idea. And then she agreed to do it. However, like a matter of weeks, if that, she passed away after her meeting with Peter Jackson. So they went back to like what the original is, where it's Carl's character who delivers the final line, which is fine. But I don't know if that reference would have been a little bit too much. I think his heart was in the right place doing it, but I don't know if that would have been a bit on the nose, sort of like ending the film with her. I don't know. What do you think?
I think so. I think that would have been too on the nose. I think if I'm going to summarize kind of my thoughts on the movie, it's a lot of overkill and a lot of stuff. It's an enjoyable film. You can get on with it and stuff like that. But there is a lot of bloating. It's a very long film. Like I do want to point out, I was able to basically do a lot of things whilst watching this film, like get on with a lot of daily tasks and stuff like that. Just with this film in the background and stuff like that. Is it worth having a watch back? Yeah, probably every now and then, maybe once every 15 or so years. If I go back through the Peter Jackson films at some point, there will be some I'm skipping. This one doesn't end up on the skip list. But it's not one that I'll be like, oh God, no, 3 hours. I'll always have that thing of like, oh, but it's 3 hours long. And that's the problem with this film. If it's trimmed down or even if the pacing of the film is better, then it's watchable. But sadly, in its current state, it's a 3 hour 20 film. You're gonna have to sit through it.
Yeah, and with Lord of the Rings, the runtime is absolutely justified. An extended edition is absolutely justified.
But here's the thing: Lord of the Rings does not drag. Lord of the Rings has good pacing. This film has the exact opposite, but the kind of similar runtime, which is what kind of lets it down.
And I think maybe because Peter Jackson was allowed to make 3 3-hour films, They just naturally allowed him to make whichever film he wanted, you know, final cut privilege and everything like that. And there's actually 16 more deleted scenes that aren't in the film on the bonus features
Chris,
as well.
I'm not doing it. I'm
not doing it. Not doing it. You know what? I'm not going to lie. I had a lot of fun watching this again today. I think it's a good blockbuster film. It's, you know, it's got all the spectacle in there. The CGI for the most part is fantastic. It's creative, it's fun, and I like seeing Peter Jackson have fun with what he does. And this was evidently a passion project for him, and that he got to make it. And, you know, he's got all these toys to play with, all of these visual effects. He can make the most. Just let him have fun, you know. Just let him play with his toys. But I think playtime in some parts does go on for a bit too long, and it could easily have been trimmed down. King Kong is a film that doesn't need to be 3 hours 20. It's an absolutely egregious runtime. And I was feeling the effects of the runtime. It was dragging for me, and I think you could have been much more economic with the storytelling. Still had the spectacle in there, still had all the Peter Jackson isms that you come to expect. But it is an overstuffed movie. You know, I don't care about the human characters. I think the writing is very on the nose. It's very cartoonish. I don't think it's a well-written film for a lot of the characters. We spend so much time with them on the boat, and it's just needless because it's so surface level that they may as well not have bothered at all doing it, in all honesty. I think its heart's in the right place. It does get emotional in some parts. I think it's just an overstuffed film. I think that is just fundamentally what it is. I think Peter Jackson needed restraint and a much better editor and get this film down to a solid 2 hours. 2 hours 15, 2:20, absolute max. So yeah, if someone's done like a fan edit of King Kong where they've taken the best bits and cut it down, then sure, like, you know, I'd absolutely watch a 2 hour cut of this film. But it is one of the, it does feel like an arduous task to get through, doesn't it? And now I'm glad I've rewatched it because it has been a while, you know, and I did have fun with it tonight. But I don't know when I'll be rushing back to watch it. It's not a story that garners, you know, 3 hours 20, and it's a big commitment to sit down and watch a film of that length. Let me tell you, it really is. So, yeah, I'm still in between on this film. I acknowledge it, you know, I acknowledge its positives, and it has many. It also has a lot of negatives. A lot of scenes of why I was yelling at you, Tate. I was like, Tate, why is this scene in the film?
Why is this happening?
Why have we got a Peggy Lee song and dance number about what Anne is doing this
in the
evening?
extended edition, she does the whole dance for Kong. You just the whole show, the whole hour and a half show.
Hopefully we never have to see that. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see someone go, I'm going to do a fan edit of King Kong and put the 16 deleted scenes back into the film as well. We get a nice, neat, even 4 hour King Kong film. But yeah, I think we've said pretty much everything that we can on this film for right now. So we hand over to you guys once again. Let us know what you think of King Kong. Do you think we were too hard on the film? Do you think we were too easy on the film? Are you in between? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Anything regarding King Kong or the works of Peter Jackson's? Any other Peter Jackson isms that you've noticed, or any, you know, comparisons to any of his other works? Do let us know as well, because one of the best things about doing retrospectives like this is where you can see their progression as a filmmaker. And you know, we'll be progressing next week. As I mentioned, Thursday, the 13th of January, we'll be covering The Lovely Bones. It's a film that I've only watched once, and it's been many years ago. Tate, you haven't seen it, so that'll be a first-time watch for you. So that'll be a very interesting review. It's much more stripped back than the epic scopes of The Lord of the Rings and certainly King Kong. So that'll be fun to do. And then we're going to put a pin in the Peter Jackson retrospective for the best part of a year almost. And then probably in December, we'll be tackling the Hobbit trilogy of some kind. That's going to be very fun to do. But we've got plenty of stuff coming out on the channel. You know, we're talking about doing more retrospectives as well. You know, film franchises, directors like this one with the Peter Jacksons. So if you want to find more information as and when we announce it, the best place to find that is on our social medias. Those are going across the bottom of the screen right now. So that's Twitter @cinema_savvy. Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy. And if you'd like to pick up any of our merch as well, we do have a link to the TeePublic in the description down below. I think that's all the formalities done. Yes. It is very late for us. It's almost 1 a.m. as of this pre-recording. So we'll end the video right here, and we'll see you guys on the next video. Take care, everyone.